Well, it's an extreme honor to have Peter Bacho and Juanita Tamayo-Lott here with us for this incredible event. So Juanita, let me introduce you. Juanita is a retired federal demographer statistician and co-founder of the School of Ethnic Studies, including Filipino American Studies at San Francisco State, and founded that school in 1969. Her books include Golden Children, Legacy of Ethnic Studies, SF State, a memoir, which is published here at East Wind Books of Berkeley. Common Destiny, Filipino Generations, Filipinos in Washington, D.C. with Rita Cacas, and Asian Americans from Racial Category to Multiple Identities. And Peter Bacho is the author of 7 books: Cebu, Dark Blue Suit, Boxing in Black and White, Nelson's Run, Entries, Leaving Gessler, and Uncle Rico's Encore. His books have received several awards, including the 1992 American Book Award. He is an adjunct professor at the Evergreen State College Tacoma campus. Bacho was born in Seattle, Washington, and grew up in Seattle's Central District. So throughout this event, if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in the chat, and we'll have Juanita read them out loud when we get to the Q&A portion. All right, Juanita, take it away.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much, Cheryl, and thanks to everyone who's on this chat. It's wonderful to see you all. I want to particularly thank East Wind Books of Berkeley, the team, because it is a team effort, but especially, our fearless leaders, Harvey and B. Dong, who have mentored so many of us to give back to our communities. They've done this since 1996, when they took ownership of East Wind Books of Berkeley, which was founded as an independent community bookstore in 1982. East Wind is a community treasure, and it's the institutional repository of our collective stories as Asian Americans. I also want to welcome and thank Peter Bacho, because Peter, for decades, has kept his eyes on the prize to speak truth to power about the rich, the complex, and the multi-layered life experiences of the Filipino American communities over many decades. I've been asked to briefly introduce Peter, so it's going to be brief. Peter is my brother. Peter is my Seattle Pacific Northwest brother, and I am his San Francisco Bay Area sister. I'm his manang. but our parents are the real manangs and manangs. And the picture behind me is my mom and dad, Lazaro and Anisha Tamayo, from their 1940 wedding in the Philippines. But our parents and our uncles and aunties, they are the people who fought hard to be American without giving up their Filipino legacy. They were militant when they needed to be, well organized, and they were always resilient since the early 1900s. As the children of these folks, as Filipino Americans, Peter and I, we brought that into our 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s childhood and youth. And in San Francisco, I was privileged to be part of the Filipino American Collegiate Endeavor at San Francisco State, where we were in the leadership of the BSU, Third World Liberation Front strike for the School of Ethnic Studies in 1969. And we have gone on. We have really admired our Seattle counterparts, because the Seattle folks, Peter, along with the Filipino Youth Activities siblings, to us, they were the Young Turks. They were in the movement and civic engagement, not just on campus, like UW, Seattle, but they were involved in Seattle, King County, state of Washington, and the federal government with manongs and manongs like the Cordovas and Uncle Bob Santos. So we find that bond. So let me just say, the first time I met Peter, I just wanted to let you know that our parents did not raise us to be model minorities. I want everybody to be sure about that. We're not model minorities. We're here to make sure we're part of civic engagement. But Peter, I first met Peter in 1992 when his book Cebu came out. And we were very excited because it was written by a Filipino American born in the United States, not an immigrant. And he won the American Book Award. So we had a book launch for him in suburban Washington, D.C., in my home, sponsored by the Philippine Arts, Letters, and Media Group. And everybody was happy. We were eating good food, including adobo and lumpia and wine. And it was celebratory. And Peter thought maybe he ought to go out and get some fresh air before he, responded to the crowd. So he went to my backyard, but my backyard goes down a hill and it goes down into the woods of Wheaton Regional Park in Maryland. And so Peter was down in the woods, in the forest, and following the tributary that ran into the Potomac River. So that's how I remember you, Peter. So yeah,
I have a thing about creeks. I love them. And so you had a creek in your own backyard. I said, damn, this is perfect. Because I mean, they're so full of life, right? And I've always been fascinated by creeks rather than larger bodies of water. And it was to me an idyllic setting. So of course I had to track it down.
Yeah, that was so much fun. He did come back.
I did eventually come back, yes.
I have 3 questions for you, Peter, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions from other folks. The first has to do with geography and demography. Today, folks talk about the diaspora of Filipinos and other ethnic groups. But what I really liked about Uncle Rico's Encore is that it is pre-diaspora. You locate a community in specific geography, intangible institutions, neighborhoods, and coordinates. Would you talk a little bit about the maps, that comprise the first few chapters?
That was about the first 6 pieces of my reading. It basically is an outline of the neighborhoods and places where the old Filipino community, members of the old Filipino community used to live. I mean, I start out in the central area and then wander eastward to Immaculate Conception, which is really the heart of the old community. I don't know how many hundreds of Filipinos were buried there, got married there, said their confessions there, et cetera, et cetera. And then I travel into Chinatown and then up into Beacon Hill, and then the South End, and then begin the story. Actually, I had enough probably for the book before I thought of the concept of maps. I wanted to give readers a geographical sense of the lay of the land. And it turned out to be, and other writers have commented on it. They like the touch. And I said, believe me, I didn't think of it at the beginning. It was kind of a last touch that I think when I was thinking through the manuscript, I was like, something is missing. These are nice little stories and so on and so forth, but I want readers to see the neighborhoods that we lived in, the lives that we lived within those neighborhoods. So I start out with 6 maps, and then the 7th map is the map at the end where I go outside the traditional boundaries of the old community. This is where the cemetery is located, and that's where my family buried my mom. So 7 maps in all.
Okay. And related to that, I wanted you, because I am a federal demographer, and I always put geography with demography. Would you talk about the specific terms? Because when we were growing up, the terms Pinoy and Pinoy were specific.
Yes, they were.
Could you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, and you see it and I did a piece on Bienvenido Santos, Scent of Apples, which is a classic collection of shorts, and he basically it was like a master class. Reading Scent of Apples was like a master class for short fiction, and the subtlety that he used. But in one of the stories, I think it was Letter Far Away Summer, Ben's group of old timers were around the Washington, D.C. area, which was revelatory to me because I thought, I didn't know Filipinos lived in D.C. during the 1930s and 1940s, but apparently they did. And the old guys, one in particular, Ambo was his name, Ambo, otherwise known as Pablo. You know, Filipinos nicknames Ambo, Pablo. He is unschooled, but he has a heart as big as the entire city. And he takes care of these pampered young brats from the elite families in the Philippines who are going to places like Harvard and Yale, but they don't have their servants around them to make sure that they have food on the plate for dinner. So I'm going to make sure that these guys are taken care of just because he's that kind of individual. He goes back to the Philippines after the war. And just like a lot of old timers who long for the Philippines and returned home, they can't take it anymore. It's changed. It's too different. And he seeks help from one of the boys that he had taken care of, a young doctor with a thriving practice. And he's treated very brusquely. It's like, you know, you're basura, you're garbage, right? And then he listens in on a conversation that this young doctor has with his wife or his lover or whoever it is. And he says, well, you know, it's nothing. What's holding me up is nothing. It's just a Pinoy, just a Pinoy. Now, you know, I know that the term has been appropriated, but when you and I were growing up, Pinoy meant that had race, class, and geographic connotations. You know, that you're Filipino, you're living in the United States, and you're working class. I guess the term itself has expanded. And that's the first time that a writer that I've run across had used the term. He's just a Pinoy, like it's less than. From that comes out of the mouth of one of the pampered boys that Ambo had taken care of. And you know, it's my shot at appropriation. Pinoy is now applicable to anybody, but in our days, it wasn't.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We want to talk about some of your friends and like in FYA, the Young Turks. I was just really enamored with you guys. Yeah,
they were a pretty special group. But the thing is that you know, I mean, they do a lot to celebrate, for example, Larry Leong, and he deserves, he's been rediscovered by a whole new generation of young Filipinos, and he's worthy, there's no doubt about it. But you know, Leong was the one who led the grape strike in Delano in '65. Not Cesar Chavez, but he's getting his rightful place now, belatedly, but he is now. But I'm saying that the history of organizing amongst Filipinos goes back a lot farther than that, to the formation of militant unions in the 1930s. The CIO unions that eventually came to represent the Alaskan canneries. That was a militant union, Congress of Industrial Organizations. It was leftist and became a little bit, the Cannery Workers Union became a little bit too leftist and eventually was booted out and then they hooked up with the longshoremen, who were even more leftist. And the person who headed up Local 37 was an old friend of mine, a guy by the name of Chris Mensalvas. He was a communist, and he was a communist leader of the union during the McCarthy era. If you can imagine that, right? Imagine that. And the federal government was doing its best to break his balls, no doubt about it. But they could never touch him because the rank and file stayed loyal to him. And basically their attitude was, fuck you. You know, the federal government doesn't determine who we choose for our leaders. So he was elected, re-elected every couple of years, and he continued as president of the union years after McCarthy had passed away. There's a fascinating case, and I documented it in the installment Bad Attitude. And it's an attitude that's passed on from fathers to sons and daughters and so on and so forth. For me, the premier example in the 1950s is when Boyd, the district director of immigration, tried his best to break the back of the union by saying that those Alascaros who went to Alaska and who weren't US citizens would be treated as people seeking entry to the United States for the first time upon their arrival. Because the Alaskan season ends, the men come back, and you can be excluded if you're seeking entry to the United States for the first time for any variety of reasons. The inspector doesn't like the way you look, for example, or you've got bad political affiliations, et cetera, et cetera. But the attitude of the rank and file, which is a remarkable attitude, and it's basically one of these untold stories, was that, no government official is going to tell us how to run our union. And that attitude was passed on to their sons and daughters.
Yes, and before that, of course, our fathers and uncles were in Hawaii.
Yeah, and they did the same thing there too.
They did there. People think the unification of people of color now is new. It's not.
Yeah.
It goes back way back when to the colonial period, and you see the Japanese and the Filipinos and the Portuguese uniting together. And
they eventually got it all together. They formed a coalition after World War II and broke the back of the Republican Party in Hawaii, permanently broke its back.
Right, and so they're the institutional power in Hawaii, and then when Hawaii becomes a state, then you see the specific presence, and it comes to the West Coast. And then when we went on strike up and down the West Coast, from UCLA up to U of W, then we brought that leadership across to the other campuses in the United States. And people want to really understand that we've done that. And I want to mention my Filipino brothers in PACE, Ron Kitachai, Ed Aluman, Bob Aluman, because it was the Filipinos who kept everybody together, I say in my book, because we're all multicultural. It was the Filipino blacks, the Filipino whites, the Filipino Chicanos, the Filipino Indians, who were able to go across all the different student groups.
Racial purity has never been a big deal with our generation, that's for sure. But we all identified as Pinoy. Right,
and I think that was our strength.
Yeah, it was a real strength.
Yeah, and I think that's what we can show folks today, particularly the younger folks.
Yep.
My other question, Peter, has to do with your book title, because you call it Uncle Rico's Encore. Why did you call it that? Because
he showed up after he died.
Well, wait a minute, because there's a chapter that you devote to Uncle Rico, and I have uncles like that. I have an Uncle Paul, who pretty much fits that. All the guys coming out of the Manila Town International District, the guys who went to the wrestling matches in Winterland, they were like that. But what I see in your book, Peter, is I see the visibility, the vulnerability, the strength, and the love that you show of Pinoys, especially your mother, Remedios. So my question is, Peter, why did you call your book something else, like an ode to Remy?
No, it's a catchier title, Uncle Rico's Encore. Mom is featured in there enough. I'm sure she doesn't begrudge the choice of Uncle Rico's Encore as my title.
I mean, the love for your mother comes really through, and all the women in your life.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that.
Too many of them.
But no, because you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
When they talk about the leadership, they never talk about the women, and we're the ones who did all the work, for crying out loud.
Yeah. Well, Mom, in a very quiet way, I think I wrote a line that when she decided to house or take in the two refugees from the Philippine embassy. They escaped,
Yeah.
Francis and Stella. She was the only one in that community that was willing to take that particular risk. And that's because Father Ocaña asked her to, and she says to me, I walk in, there's two women sleeping on the floor. Says, who are these? And she tells me the backstory. And of course, I read it in the paper. But there are risks with that because remember, Marcos was ruling the Philippines with an iron fist, and this wasn't part of this happy, sunny narrative, right? That these women should be so mistreated. And I wrote a line in there saying that I thanked her for this crystalline moment of moral clarity, that she would take them in when no one else would step forward. And she says, well, you know, how can you say no to a priest? Those are actual words. Yeah. How can you say no to a priest?
I still want to know why you called your book Uncle Rico.
Yeah. Well, because he was, of the men, he was probably my favorite. And that includes my dad. He was like a second father to me. Okay. I love my dad though. Yeah.
But I really love the way you talk about our community and almost every character you talked about, I could match in San Francisco and Stockton.
Yeah, well,
and Vallejo. So thank you for that.
The comments that I get from people of my peer group, those in Seattle, has essentially been, to say thanks for telling our story. And that was the purpose of telling a story. It wasn't just about me and my family and my missteps, many of my missteps, but it was also the story of a community, of a peer group. And I wanted to make it a very, very collective effort, a very collective project. Someone had to tell their story, so I guess it fell on me.
Yes, I'm so glad you did. And you did it over both personal and collective history and specific timelines.
Right.
You also talk about truth. And you talk about two kinds of truth.
Yeah, story truth and truth. Yeah.
And because you were a journalist, right?
Yep.
So you got to do facts and figures. But then you also talk about the story truth, which why you started writing short stories and novels and the kinds of things we can do with our dreams. And I'm finding like with a lot of the young writers, they're into the story truth a lot. And so my question, and you also talk about, when I watch you on Hugo House, for example, you talk about the inner voice and the muse. So what I'd like you to address is kind of like, what do these truths mean to you, and how do you engage the younger writers? Because right now, being a Filipino or being an Asian American is a big deal. We're the flavor of the month in the publishing world, and that can go away tomorrow, right?
Yeah, so that's true. That's very true.
Yeah, because when I first published my book in 1998, it was a very different way from publishing my book in 2018.
The doors were closed then.
Yeah, so if you could talk about the creative control, the marketing, what people have to face, but what is the truth?
For me, this is theoretically a memoir, and about 90% of it is true, but some of it isn't. For example, in a book I wrote about baseball and fishing, The Fishing Man. Young Peter Bacho is fascinated with field and stream and looking at pictures of white flight fishermen catching these beautiful brown trout, these tail walking, beautiful fish in cold water streams and distant states like Montana and sometimes even other countries like Canada. And that's a sport for the elite, right? But he loves fishing because that's what he does with his dad. Although it's handline fishing down on the docks, right? Catch shiners and lesser fish and that sort of thing. He wanted to become one of these fly fishing men. But first he had to get a pole. And so he walks into the living room, the young Peter does, and goes to the Sears catalog, which I understand no longer exists, the Sears catalog, and goes to the sports section. And that's the realm of the regal Ted Williams, like the great Hall of Fame slugger hitter for the Boston Red Sox. And at the time, Ted Williams was the Sears spokesman for outdoor gear. So fishing, hunting, there's Ted Williams in his yellow jacket. And he steps out of the catalog and he talks to the young Peter. Now, obviously that didn't happen, but the story truth is that I wanted to make a point here about what I did not become. I didn't become a fly fishing man. My model was an old African American man who fished at the docks and at Madison Beach, and he would load up his bait with worms, and he was very successful. Worms and eggs and marshmallows, and the cutaway at the end was that, nope, I'm sitting at the dock on American Lake, which is close to my house near Tacoma, and it's a spring day, and I do the same thing that the fishing man does. I load up my bait with my hook with worm, eggs, and a marshmallow. And that's not a combination found in nature, but that's what I'm doing. I did not become what I had thought originally I wanted to be, a white fly fishing man. Chose something else. That's the story truth. But I think it made the point of the story.
Well, let's segue a little bit into the Philippines, because, you know, when they tell stories now, the ghosts are there, the dreams are there, the shadows, not quite sure, you know, what's true, what's imagination, somewhere in between. Could you talk a little bit about the influence that you've gotten from, you know, the stories of the Philippines that our parents used to tell us?
Well, I was always fascinated by it. Eventually I got to cover it as a journalist. I was with the Christian Science Monitor at the time. I was what they would call a stringer, but I wrote editorials encouraging a change in U.S. policy. My last time there was in 1987. It was the year Gregorio Honasan mounted a coup against the Aquino administration. It was damn near successful. And so I found myself in the middle of the biggest foreign policy story out of Asia. I recorded it. And I ended up covering a pocket of battle as a journalist. It was near the government-controlled media station, television and radio, I think it was, out near Quezon City. And I was running along the wall following these 3 armored personnel carriers who were about ready to break the siege because the center had been taken over by rebels, obviously. And as soon as the first one broke through the gates, then, you know, everything broke out. Just automatic weapons fire, small cannon, et cetera, and I hit the ground. And people were streaming out from the compound, and one of them and I were like nose to nose, about 6 inches apart. And I said, the coolest thing I've ever said under pressure. I pulled out a cigarette. No, I didn't pull out the cigarette. The cigarette was still in the pocket. And I asked him in Bisayan, "Oy, bye, do na po may phosphoro," which means, "Hey man, you got a match." I've never been back there since. I have no desire to go. I have no desire to go. The reason I have no desire to go is that, I really don't think, looking at it from the perspective of someone living here on the West Coast, that the place is ungovernable. It really wasn't meant to be a nation, to be honest. I mean, it was grabbed because this is as far as the Spanish galleons went. When you have 7,000 islands and 7 major languages and 100+ dialects, how are you going to govern the damn place? And so you've got these problems. It's like, I did what I could, and now they've just elected, a Marcos to succeed Duterte, who was renowned for one thing and one thing only, and that's ex officio killings of suspects. So it's like, man, I forget it. Nothing I can do here. Nothing anyone outside of the Philippines can do. So, the warm sentiments that particularly recent immigrants have of the Philippines, I don't have those sentiments.
You don't
My
have
home
those.
is here. Nope. Not curious about them. Don't have them. I've done my bit.
Could you talk a little bit about the institutions that shaped us as, the young Filipino Americans? Like, our fathers were soldiers, our fathers were in the Union movement, but also the Catholic Church and other, religious institutions also helped us to be in the social justice and activist kind of mode.
Yeah, the Union played a big role. The church also played a big role. I mean, it's still in me, even though I'm no longer, lapsed, just like just about everybody I know. But establishing in me a clear sense of right and wrong. We may disagree in terms of what right and wrong is, but we know that there is a right and there is a wrong. You make your decision and you stand by it. So church is a big influence. I mean, I was cradle to grave Catholic, right? Mom was very religious. So from high school, grade school to high school to college, those were in church institutions, Catholic church institutions.
You think that's true of other Filipino American communities around the U.S.? Has that been your experience as you go around the country?
I can't speak beyond the Seattle community, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Yeah, because I mean, even now, when we look at the Filipino American community, we're good at like following orders and keeping things together. I mean, you find them like in these positions of high-level assistants or the staff person, but not the leader. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that it's not about us, it's about the goal, it's about the mission, it's about the institution, it's the collective, it's not the individual.
Yeah, well, you can get a lot of stuff done if you're willing to stay in the background. I mean, Bobby found that out. I think there's a certain amount of truth to that. Bobby found that out. I mean, when we were pushing for housing in Chinatown in the 70s, we got it. We won. And the old timers were able to live the last 5-10 years of their life in decent housing as opposed to hot plate rooms. As I've been in enough of those hot plate rooms. They suck. They stink. They don't have refrigeration. If you want to keep your milk cold, you keep it outside on this on the safety ladder, or you know, those little ladders that go up and down on the side of the building. And that's how you do it. And then you've got one bathroom per floor. And that's why, you know, among other things, they had bathhouses in Chinatown, the Victory Bathhouse being one of them, because, you know, the places they lived were substandard. But we were able to pressure HUD through demonstrations that I was part of to take care of the needs of Chinatown's poor. But Bobby Santos, I think he was a remarkable figure, was able to work behind the scenes and get bureaucrats to release the money. And before you know it, the place is flooded with financial assistance for landowners, hotel owners to rehab the buildings. So our old people did okay. We did our job, and it was like no one wanted to really say, "I am the leader of this." No one claimed that. No one claimed that. You're able to get a lot of stuff done if you're willing to step behind the scenes and not have the spotlight shine on you.
Right, that was our experience in San Francisco too, with the Third World Liberation Front. We had a rotating chairmanship so that there was no one leader. And when somebody won in front of the press, they didn't go there for their egos. It was because there was a consensus among all the different groups. And I think you're right. I think our strength has been, you know, being behind the scenes. And I'm thinking of people like Larry Leong. They didn't get their credit because they're so busy doing all the work that has to be done with the bureaucracy that they didn't get that. And also because they weren't in it for themselves. They were in it for the collective, right? And I think that's the lesson I'm hoping that we can we can pass on to the next generation of activists.
Well, in the Seattle situation, we won that struggle. I'm giving credit. I'm giving credit where credit is due, and a lot of the credit goes to the other young activists, but a whole lot goes to Bobby Santos, the late Bobby Santos, who was able to work the system and make the system produce.
Yeah, the legacy of Uncle Bob, the legacy of the Monoms in Stockton, up and down the coast. I think it continues on, and I think the younger generations, particularly the post-65 immigrants, don't, in my view, always acknowledge that. Right. But you know, people united really can get stuff done, but they have to do it in coalition with. Yeah,
it was a remarkable community. Seattle was a remarkable community. We're home to the union. We got housing for our elderly. And they even got a damn statue of Jose P. Rizal and a park named after him.
The park.
Yeah.
That's pretty. And the park. That's pretty. And that was in the what, 90s? That was
80s. It was 80s. 80s? Trinidad Rojo and my uncle Vic were spearheading that. And I'm thinking to myself as a youngster, I said, what the hell do people care about Jose Rizal? You know, what's he doing in Seattle? But he's there, and this was an effective community. As I recall it, despite its small numbers, it was very politically effective.
Yes, yes.
And someone needed to tell that story.
Yes, and the fact that, you know, you can learn from those lessons and you can win again, but you have to be willing to sacrifice and do the whole thing. And we have a few more, let's see. I'm looking at the time, and so we have some questions that we have, but I'd like to ask you first, Peter, if you had any questions for me.
I didn't know you were in Seattle. We'll have to get together.
Here I am.
I thought you were still stuck on the East Coast somewhere, having to deal with that oppressive heat that happens in the middle of summer.
Well, I've been enjoying the cooler weather, but the rain and the darkness, the latitude is really
you get used to it.
It's something to get used to. But I am very happy to see this community thriving. That's one of the reasons, you know, I moved to Seattle, was because the lessons that were there are just the civic engagement. I think you guys, more than anything, believed that we could work through the system, and the fact that you had people in political office very early on, Wing Luke. You know, you guys started really early, because I work with people like Mitch Masadera and Art Wang, and it's like you guys really knew how to work the system.
Well, you know, my generation, we didn't believe in losing.
Yeah, I don't think we do. And I think that's where we're not the model minority.
Yeah.
You know? Peter. So I think now I guess I'd like to look at some of the questions. Cheryl, do you want to say anything at this point?
I think I just loved listening to both of you talk. So
yeah, everybody should look at the book Humbao Not Hot Dogs. That's really a great book for and then The Gang of Four that Uncle Bob wrote before he died. Okay, questions. What do I see here? What are the next
Karen has a question.
Okay.
Oh, I just said, is there one anecdote that you feel best encapsulates the spirit of the community, like the Filipino community? Like, if there was one anecdote that you had to say that like best, you know, like shows the like vibrancy and all that.
I've got one. Bobby's dad, Sammy, was a very good professional fighter, and Bobby was a good amateur boxer. But his damage in the ring was because he really wasn't trained. He went straight from being a civilian to fighting on undercards for around smokers, that sort of thing, because, you know, money was tight then. And as a result of his 100 or so fights, he ended up blind in both eyes. And Bobby tells this story. he was in the 50s or 60s, I can't remember which. He was sitting in a bar with Bobby, and this large white guy was giving one of his Filipino friends problems, just guff, right? And so Sammy says to Bobby, put my hand on his shoulder. Remember, Sammy's blind. The next thing he does is he knocks him out. And he says, oh, Bobby, we better get out of here. That's a true story.
Yeah. Mine had to do with being in San Francisco and rooting for the San Francisco Giants at Seal Stadium.
Oh, I was rooting for him too.
And that was like, you know, and also the wrestling matches, because the Mondoms babysat for me and my brother, so they took us to the wrestling matches.
Yeah.
And to the Giants games.
Yeah.
And the pool halls on Kearney Street. And so this is where the guys, you know, these guys were discriminated and subjected to all sorts of nonsense.
Oh yeah.
And when they were out at the wrestling matches, at the boxing matches, then at the Giants games, they would let out all this energy. They would let out the, you know, they would be hitting the air, and they were getting out their frustrations. And I realized, you know, this is where they can let loose. And that always struck me. But they also said, you know, you can win. The Giants can win. And also because we could see people of color. I mean, the Giants, the Dodgers came to the West Coast. It was like, hey, you know, they're not all white guys. And, and it's the people of color that are winning for us. And that's what I took away.
I identified the same way. I hated the Yankees. They're virtually all white except for Elston Howard. And I love the Dodgers because the Dodgers absolutely have, you know, they had Jackie and Campy and let's see, Newcomb. And when they came to the West Coast, my attention switched immediately to the San Francisco Giants with the two Willies, and I don't know how many I'll lose. I think 3 of them. And that crew there, because these were African-American or Latin players. And at least with the Latin players, they had Spanish-sounding last names, kind of like I did. So that was pretty cool. And my big heartbreak was in 1962 when Game 7 of San Francisco against New York, and I hated the Yankees. I hated them with just a genuine passion. The Mickey Mantle and Roger Maris, I hated those guys. I don't know how I could hate Yogi Berra, but during that time, I actually hated him too. So, but he was one of the nicest guys ever to play professional sports, right? But my big heartbreak was with runners on base and a chance to win. Willie McCovey hits a screaming line drive that Bobby Richardson, you remember that, 62. Bobby Richardson snags out of nowhere. He should never have gotten it. And the Giants lose, and I'm a heartbroken 12-year-old.
But the other Filipino hero, sports hero that we talked about was in football. Roman
Gabriel, yeah.
Los Angeles Dodgers. I'm
Yeah.
Los Angeles Rams. Rams? Was it the Rams?
Yeah, it was the Rams, and I used to watch. I think Roman, when the Rams came to town, they would play in Kezar.
Yeah, Kezar Stadium.
Kezar Stadium, which is right on the hill, right?
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
you know,
my family lived on Carl Street, right by UCSF.
And I forgot, I didn't realize how small that little stadium is. I'd watch Y.A. Tittle on my little black and white, and I think it was R.C. Owens and the rest of those guys. And I didn't realize, I mean, it looked like a little high school stadium, Kezar Stadium, but those were different days.
I just wanted to thank Juanita and Peter for your beautiful stories and for your time and for creating this beautiful space for us. It was an amazing time with y'all.